share something with you that might put me in a very negative light, yeah.
Relationships are not my forte.
See if someone grabbed up my wife or something, completely different ballgame.
I'll walk away from it, and this has been like a therapy session.
This is Joe Pugh for IFL TV, proudly sponsored by Everlast. Delighted to be joined by the Daily Mail's Jeff Powell. Very strange circumstances, but we've just heard the news, the confirmation in the past 5 to 10 minutes that the fight is off. Chris Eubank Jr versus Conor Benn, after Eddie Hearn, the lawyers, failing to come to some kind of agreement with the British Boxing Board. Can I get your reaction, Jeff?
Thank God for that, to start with. It's unfortunate for all concerned. We don't know if it's unfortunate for Ben because we're not sure about his situation, whether his protestations of innocence are correct, but it's very unfortunate for everybody else, for sure. There's a lot of money at stake here, not all of which will be recovered if and when this fight ever takes place and is rescheduled. It would certainly have damaging effects on the television companies who are going to have to refund subscriptions and so on. And I believe DAZN are particularly stressed about that, which will obviously not please Eddie Hearn. He struggled for as long as he could with this, but in terms of the bigger picture of boxing, which he did allude to himself yesterday, he was concerned about. This is the only outcome which could have saved some credibility for the sport. The damage that would have been done by going into a fight in which Chris Eubank would have been taking on an opponent who has built up his size, allegedly by the use of steroids, and his punching power, having come down himself in weight, perhaps been drained, perhaps been dehydrated, perhaps hospitalised, perhaps worse if he walked onto a sudden burst of power, which we haven't seen all that much of from Ben before, then this would have been an absolute catastrophe. That risk was not worth taking. The image to the game of going into a fight with a boxer who's still under suspicion of doping would also have been terrible. It's unfortunate, especially for Chris Eubank, who presumably is not getting his purse, who's trained like a slave to get down to 3 pounds under his usual middleweight limit for the catch weight that they'd agreed. Now, at 32-3, it's not easy for a man to come down that far. Bear in mind, that Chris had gone up earlier with comfort and to good effect to super middleweight. So this has been a huge, huge effort for him. And if Nigel Benn has done this to him, that is a disgrace. I hope it's not that case. I hope Nigel is innocent. Our affection for the Benn family, or mine certainly, goes right back to his father, who I watched perform his deeds of daring do before. But what's been done to Eubank here is terrible. I would hope there'll be some kind of compensation for him, because he won't get the big purse unless they do fight. But of course that will be up to Eddie.
Just being around here, the media is phenomenal. No one kind of knew what we were going into today. I'm sure you agree. It was on, then it was off, then it was on, then it was off. What were you thinking when promoters were talking about maybe looking at the Luxembourg board and going to a different board?
I thought that would have been very unfortunate, and I also thought it was most unlikely. Because I'm not sure that the European, while they supported the fight between David Haye and Chisora going on years ago at West Ham Stadium by letting Luxembourg run it, it's a different set of circumstances. Both those boxers were not licensed by the British Board of Control, and drugs were not involved. I think it was extremely unlikely that the European Boxing Union would have given Luxembourg permission to repeat that act, that piece of business. So I didn't really expect it to happen, and I'm very glad it hasn't, because in the context of all else that we've just talked about, which would have been very unfortunate if that had also been stained by being put on by some tuppenny halfpenny show in a little principality in the middle of, or duchy in the middle of Luxembourg. That would have looked even worse. Boxing has escaped from this with a clean rather than a very badly blooded nose. And as I said at the start of this, thank God.
Having said that then, were you shocked that promoters yesterday and both fighters were still saying that the fight was still going ahead?
Not shocked, no, because in these circumstances nobody wants to give up on it. I think it would have perhaps been better for Eddie if he'd bitten the bullet to begin with. But he must have been under immense pressure, especially from DAZN, who have committed a fortune to this, who have already now lost the Fury Joshua fight, in which he's been involved in the negotiations. This has been a very bad week for DAZN and Eddie's partnership with them. Not that I think that's a risk, but it's not been good for them. So the pressure must have been intense, and I'm pleased that sanity has now prevailed.
Last one from me, Jeff. You've been around the sport for a very long time, and this is a bad look for British boxing this week with the doping of Conor Benn. Obviously, we don't know all the details yet. We have to be careful what we say. But where does this rank for you in terms of bad looks for boxing?
It's difficult to say because you're looking back at a whole case history of many things. There was an example once when Frank Bruno went all the way to Hong Kong for a fight, and the promoter in whom he had put great trust suddenly didn't have the money to pay the fighters. Things like that have been going on for a long time. The perspective of drugs in this, though, makes it as bad as it gets.
Thank you very much for speaking for Raphael. Good.
But it hasn't happened, and thank goodness for that. And boxing's had a narrow escape. Had the drugs test been revealed after the fight, it would have been an absolute disaster.
Jeff Powell, thank you very much for speaking to IFL TV, and hopefully speak to you again soon, hopefully under better circumstances.
Oh, absolutely pleasure as always to speak to you, and it would have been nice to see the fight, and perhaps we still will.
Let's hope so. Cheers, Jeff.
I'm going to share something with you. That might put me in a very negative light, yeah.
Relationships are not my forte.
See if someone grabbed up my wife and saying completely different ballgame.
I'll walk away from it, and this has been like a therapy session.